and I heard something going. The problem with us when we get to starting about something, we never actually finish it because we branch off into so many damn different directions that every one of them has very important meaning towards what we're discussing in the first place. What we call a Bigfoot and a Sasquatch, we call them boogers in the South. I said, what in the hell is that? Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of Bigfoot Outlaw Radio. We've got our regulars on here. Of course, there's Matt Knapp and Tim Kumbo Baker, my good friend and fellow research partner. Tonight, we're honored with the presence of, I think, I call her the queen of the Bigfoot world, Miss Brenda Harris, out from New Mexico, Arizona, up there in the Four Corners. How you doing, Brenda?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Great. Oh, we enjoy having you every time you've got time to come on the show and help us out. Tonight we're going to approach a subject that a lot of people don't want to discuss. We're going to talk about the taboo of the Bigfoot world. I'm sure a lot of people may be scratching their head and saying, what in the heck is he talking about? But to start it all out and to give prime examples, we're just going to discuss things that a lot of people don't want to even think that a Bigfoot is capable of doing. They don't even want to discuss it. That's why we try to emphasize a lot of times, yes, this is an animal. It's an extraordinary animal, but it's a wild animal. It's one out there that walks on two legs at times, just like a human. But just because it walks like a human and maybe even communicate in its own fashion like a human, don't make it a human. That's going to be probably a subject of contention later on, but maybe after we do this show that hopefully we can enlighten some people on what we're specifically talking about. But we're not going to sit here and tell you that a booger is something like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, the movie that was put out years ago. It's definitely not that way, even though a lot of people want it to be the gentle giant. And it may be and have its moments, and it will be a gentle giant. But if you'll watch a grizzly bear in the wild, or a mountain lion, or a coyote, or a wolf, at times they have gentle moments too. But I guarantee you, you're not going to walk up to a grizzly bear and pet him while he's over there harvesting on an elk. You're not going to do the same thing with a pack of wolves over a carcass of a white-tailed deer. Common sense comes into play a lot of ways. And with Bigfoot, you do not give it the benefit of a doubt in regard to it being a gentle giant. You have to use a lot of common sense, a lot of caution, and be prepared because you may wake up a sleeping giant that you don't want to contend with later. I'm going to start this whole segment off with something. We've discussed this show. How long, Matt? For the last 2 or 3 months. It's something we wanted to approach when we originally did this show back in 7, 8 years ago, but we never would do it. But I'm thinking it's way beyond time that we need to approach this.
Right. There are things that, like you said, don't really get discussed in terms of, Bigfoot research and what people know and what people don't know. Lots of people want to paint a picture and make this thing something that they want it to be and not what it actually is. And the fact of the matter is, these things can and will be very dangerous.
They have a dark side.
They definitely have a dark side.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're speaking of dark sides, we're not talking about the mystic arts either. There's nothing magical. No, we're not talking that way at all.
No, we're just talking about the brutality of nature.
And that's what it is, basically, is the brutality of nature. What do you think about it in terms of trying to explain this to people, what we're going to discuss, Brenda, or do you have anything you'd like to reflect on before we dive into it with both feet?
Well, I would like to bring out more, some of the stuff that you're saying, but also some of the do's and don'ts. Right. I think a lot of that needs to be brought back up. Things that they could look out for. And if people out there are having some problems with these things coming around on their property and they don't want them there, if I could share some of the things that may help the people, that's the one reason why I got into this. You hear so many of people collecting like the evidence and footprints and casts and the vocalizations and, hair samples and all that. That's great. That's more evidence that can be proven that these things do exist. They're out there. But, and every research group that I have come across and have listened to, it seems like a lot of them are about themselves, right. Kind of that brag about themselves, that are the so-called number one Bigfoot researchers out there. In my own opinion, I know this will probably make a lot of groups out there upset. There's no number one research group out there. We are all doing the same thing. We're all assuming the same thing. We're all showing the pictures, everything. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good because that's good evidence. But my whole issue is, what about the safety of the people? That's right. My concern. I worry about the people. Some things that have happened in the past that I'll bring up. I think those things are the things that need to be brought up. What do we do? Yes, a lot of people don't understand, and like you had brought up, they think a lot of these things are friendly, but no, they're not. They'll turn on you if you're not ready. Yep. We, all of us need to be out there in the research field, need to be very careful of these things. I don't care how experienced or how famous you are, this thing will knock you down to the ground.
Yes, it will.
Do more than that, do you?
It'll turn you inside out, literally.
It will. If you're not ready, it will. Mm-hmm. That's scary. Some people die from that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's my whole deal. That's the reason why I got into this Bigfoot thing, is to get the awareness out there. Be careful of your surroundings out there. Look out for these little things. Do some of these little things that may help keep these things away. That's what I wanted to bring up tonight. Is a lot of that.
And don't do some of the big things that are just inviting trouble.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, this was before I started driving. I started driving in 1975. We already knew that these things were on my grandfather's farm. I mean, we could hear the vocalizations. We had already seen the one that looked in me and my brother's bedroom window in the mid-'60s. Then me and my brother and sister were out chasing lightning bugs or fireflies that time in the early 70s. And we seen one up close, the one that wanted to actually... It was a younger one who decided to trot across the pasture to join me and my brother and my sister while we was chasing these lightning bugs, and we was putting them in mason jars. And we already knew they was there. My grandfather, he already knew from his past experience with them through the years that these things existed, even though he knew that nobody wanted to acknowledge that they did. He was very cognizant of the fact that these things, you couldn't just approach this subject with just anybody about it, because the first thing you'd do is they'd either make light or fun of you, or they would ridicule you and consider you being crazy and all this. But we had horses and we had cattle on my grandfather's property. At times, we, as kids back in those days, especially during the summer months, once elementary school had let out, for the year, we'd spend most of our times catching up the horses every morning when we'd get up after we'd done our chores on the farm, and we'd ride the horses. But there was times when our horses would be acting plumb spooked and wild and crazy. And when these occasions would occur, we'd start noticing certain things on the horses that, just really blew our mind. And what it was we would find, once we would be able to capture the horse or slow it down from what it was doing, because I'm going to go into that a little bit later and maybe everybody understand what I'm talking about. But once we did have the horses where we'd calm them down enough so we could put the tack on them, like the bridle and the saddle, we'd notice that, when we walked up to the horses, especially the mares, and for those uneducated and not from the country, a mare is a female horse. Especially on the mares, we would see where their mane in certain locations. The mane is the hair that recedes along the backbone from the top of the head down to where the neck recedes back into the trunk of the body, would be braided. I mean, it was not a perfect braid.
It's more like it was twisted.
Yeah, it
almost
was
like twisted, sort of like somebody's trying to twist it into a rope or something.
Yeah, that's what that was something else my grandfather showed us. Whenever we would be, I got into rodeoing a little bit when I was in the 80s, and it was from my love of horses and the sport of riding horses and things like this. He would teach us how to braid a lariat or a rope, because we even tried to learn how to rope and tie steers and calves. We wanted to do that, but we didn't get into that. But we started noticing that when we'd pin the horses up, not only was some of these horses' manes would be braided, there would be spots in its tail that would be braided also.
And twisted.
Do what?
And twisted.
And twisted. And we didn't know what was, We really didn't know what was causing this, but we would look at it and we'd scratch our head. We knew the horse didn't do it. And, we even suspected at that time my grandfather's property, it's a pretty large tract of land, and we was neighbors on around the curve, which was probably about a mile around the road. They had some children, and we just assumed that maybe, while the horses were roaming the property, like we would have them do along with the cattle, that maybe the neighbors' kids had caught up the horses and just decided to braid the mane or the tail. But it wasn't perfect at all, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. Then it was about 1973. This gentleman's wife had left him and abandoned him and his 2 small boys. Well, he didn't have a place to live or nothing. And he had bought an old RV, one of them metal, what are they called, streamliners, Kumbo?
Airstream.
Airstream, there we go. Mm-hmm. He had bought an old Airstream for a little next to nothing, but he didn't have no place to set his trailer. And my grandfather agreed, since he knew this gentleman, to let him put it on the corner of our property on around the curve next to these other neighbors. And we even fenced it off for him so the cattle and the horses wouldn't interfere with him driving up the old road bed to where my grandfather allowed him to put this camper, this trailer. And this gentleman come over to the house one night, and you could tell he was really nervous about something. And I was out there with my grandfather. We'd met him on the front porch, and it wasn't rare for him to come around, but it was rare for him to be nervous. I mean, he was real fidgety, and you could tell he wanted to talk about something that he just didn't really want to say, but he had to say it anyway. And I was out there with my granddaddy when this happened, and the gentleman even asked my grandfather if I would go into the house, because I wasn't but about 13, 14 years old at the time, because he had something he needed to talk to my granddaddy about. Well, I went on inside out of respect for the gentleman and my grandfather, but in the course of the conversation, my grandfather called me back out to the front, and I was, of course, real curious about what was being talked about at the time. And you know how kids are. I knew something was going on, but I didn't know what it was. But my grandfather called me to come back out there because this is the gist of what we was told. He was in his camper one night about 1 a.m. in the morning, and his 2 sons were in there. They woke up to our horses, which we had 3 at the time. 2 of them was mares, and one of them was a stallion colt that was 2 years old. He was the get off of the older mare that we had. He told us that him and his sons heard the horses screaming. And, this caught my grandfather's attention, and it woke him up, this gentleman up. And when he did, it also woke up his 2 sons. And when he put the trailer up there, when they put the power, run the light poles up to the camper, he had a halogen light placed in the front yard, and it put off plenty of ambient light all around the surrounding area. You could actually see across the barbed wire fence that we placed around his property to keep our cattle and horses part of the pasture next to his camper. What had happened was, when this gentleman heard the horses screaming, he assumed that something was messing with our horses out there next to his house. He knew who owned the horses because it was on our property. So he grabs his pistol and he bails out the camper door into his little yard right there, and he walks around the corner where the camper was in relation to our pasture, and he looks across the fence. What he sees at the time, he saw all 3 of my horses backed into the L shape of where the barbed wire fence that we put around his camper created in that corner next to the road. Instead of it being wide open pasture there, it was like a square had been squared off. In that corner of that square, hemmed up in the corner of that barbed wire fence was both of my mare horses and the stallion. The stallion was pawing and fighting back at two boogers. It was two Bigfoot. One of them was trying to separate the stallion from the two mares. One of them was a distraction. He was trying to separate the stallion away from the two mares. Both of them were standing there, and yes, I've got a lady in the room, and Miss Brenda already knows what the subject is about, but she has a story or two to offer her of her own, I'm sure. But what happened, and he caught his notice, was both of the Bigfoot were on two legs, and both of them had obvious sexual intentions in mind. In other words, it was no problem telling that both of them were males, and one of them was trying to get the stallion away from the two females. That's when my neighbor, who had the pistol, he shot up in the air. Even the sound of him waking up and bumping around in that camper and then coming out the door and everything, the two Bigfoot were so intent on what they was trying to do that they never paid any attention to the gentleman coming out of the camper. They didn't even know he was standing there. So to get their attention, he shot up into the air 2 or 3 times. When he did, that's when the Bigfoot saw him there. Not only did this gentleman come out of the camper, of course, his 2 young sons didn't want to be left in there by themselves, and they were scared. They had slipped out the door, too, and they were standing there at the corner of the camper watching all this, too. Over the years, they have talked to me about this since, and they told me what they saw, and they saw the exact same thing their father saw. But these 2 sexual perverts was in the act of looking like they were sexually aroused, and they was trying to attempt to separate the stallion from the 2 mares. That's when everything clicked about the braided hair and the braided tail. Because now I'm going to go into the spiel that I told you I was holding back till later. We started noticing that certain days that the horses would act like they had eaten loco weed or something. What would happen is they would be all wall-eyed and nervous and running back and forth across the pasture for no apparent reason. We didn't know what was going on. They was just acting like they ate something or had the colic or something that didn't agree with them. Every time this would happen, when a horse is stretched, a horse does sweat. I'm going to go into a little bit about this. But a horse does not sweat like a human does. Only time a horse really, really sweats is when it's under a lot of stress. When a horse is under a lot of stress, it'll break out into a sweat. I mean, you could touch it on its hip or its flanks or its shoulder, and it'll be dripping wet with sweat. When you touch the hips or the flank or the shoulder or the neck area when a horse is in this stage, if you put your hand on it to rub it down or even just to set your hand on top of this horse for less than a minute and you can remove your hand, you can see visibly your handprint from all the sweat that's accumulating on the hide of the horse.
That's right.
What we got to noticing was not only were we finding braided horse manes and braided horse tails, we were seeing large handprints on the hips of this horse or on the shoulder up there near where the braid was. We figured out what was going on. These things were sexually assaulting our female horses. Now, this is hard to believe, people, but I'm telling you, I'm not the only one that's ever run into this. That's why we're doing this show tonight the way we're doing it. I've never heard that many people bring this to the public's attention. But these things do sexually assault horses and cattle, especially cows, female heifers. They will sexually assault them. What happens is, and we figured it out, one will always hold the head, and when it grabs a horse by its head, of course, the first thing a horse is going to do is rear up or try to raise up on its hind legs. When it does that, it uses its hooves to protect itself. It's the only means other than biting how a horse will physically defend itself. What they would do, one would go up to around the neck area and wrap his arm around a horse's neck, hold it in place so it will not turn around and bite him. Then it will grab as much of its mane that it can, and it will envelop and entwine its fingers in the horse's mane. When it does this, it wraps all the mane around their fingers, and they will hold it with a death grip to keep that horse from rearing up or moving, and to keep its head stationary to keep it from rearing up. While it's holding the front end down, that's when the partner in this crime will come in from behind and grab the tail, and then it'll take care of business. Once it's through doing it, they'll swap positions, and then however long they'll do this, and then they'll turn the horse loose, and the horse will act like it is on loco weed for 3 days. Mm-hmm. Now, it would do the same thing with a cow, a female cow, a heifer, not a bull, a cow. It will grab a cow's tail. The other one will grab a cow by his neck. It will grab a cow's tail close to the root where the tail comes out, and it will hold it so tight and bend it out of the way so it can accomplish what its intentions are, that it will 9 times out of 10 break the trunk of that tail on that cow. The cow will do the same thing as a horse, with the exception of the sweating. It'll run around there lowing and mooing for 2 or 3 days afterwards. Its eyes all walled out of its head, and it's scared to death, and the tail on it will be broken.
Well, another thing it'll do, you see with a cow, because the cow doesn't have a good mane for the guy, the one that's holding the head, it'll grab a hold of an ear. And a lot of times we'd find a cow with an ear boogered up or half ripped off, or the cartilage broke on it or something. The ear all lopsided and looking crazy, like something's hit it or done something to it. And we wouldn't find, that we'd find usually. I'd find it probably a little bit more ears torn up than I would tails broke. But a lot of times you could see where the tail had been twisted, and a lot of times the skin would be broken on the tail where they'd had it. I think a lot of times those little heifers would just try to fall down. Well, they'd grab them by the tail and hold them up, and keep them from laying down. And we would find that on our cattle, and it took me, I'd wonder, well, what in the world's getting hold of that? What's tearing those tails and ears up like that? And tearing that hide, because cowhide's tough now, and
it is raw.
And I can remember when when we started finding that on our horses, and especially our mare, one of our mares. I'd go out there and, why is she acting so crazy? And it'd take me a while to get her calmed down. I'd finally get her calmed down. I'd say, well, dadgum, look at the dadgum tail. Look at the mane. It's all messed up. and I'd get out the brush and the rake and start trying to straighten it all out and comb it all out and everything. And I noticed one day when I was combing out her mane that I got pretty good sized hands, and I noticed that my fingers sort of fit in there where this hair was all knotted up. And I said, well, son of a gun, something's had a hold of it there. And I noticed one time I was combing her out, and I found like fingernail marks up under the mane where the mane had flopped over to the side. And I was sort of raising it up and raking it out from the bottom, and I found these fingernail marks, and where they weren't claw marks like a panther or something. They looked like where a person had scratched another person or something. They were big, wide scratch marks, and I thought, well, what in the hell's going on here? And then I'd find the same thing, back on the tail, the way the tail was knotted up. And I can remember one day I spent probably 2 hours out there, combing out the tail and the mane on our mare. Came back out there with a curry comb, and came out there the next day, and it's all done up again. And I had been out there till dark that evening before, but I didn't live on the farm at the time. I lived in town, and I came out there the next morning, and it's all wadded up again. And I get out there, and she's running up and down, acting crazy. And when I finally pulled up there, and she sees the truck, here she comes, wide open over there. And it still took me a good while to ever get an eye to ever figure out what was going on. I never saw him doing it like the guy on your farm did, but I eventually figured out. I found enough evidence on the horse and on some of the cattle and stuff and like I said, the handprints and things that I knew wasn't a human handprint. I eventually figured out what was happening. And, I can remember, Bear, you and I knew each other for a couple of years before either one of us ever broached the subject to the other one, if we'd ever seen that, because that was one of those things that I was afraid to even mention.
Bring up. Yeah.
Bring up that somebody think I was crazy. And,
yeah. And that's even with me and you knowing what we knew about each other.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And yeah. I know exactly, because I'll never forget the first time me and you talked about this.
Yeah.
And if it hadn't have been for our neighbor coming around there and volunteering the information, we probably would have sat there and scratched our head forever about what was causing it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen people on the internet over the years be bragging about, the Bigfoot has braided our horse's mane, or has braided the horse's tail. Ain't that sweet? And I'd always sarcastically would say, well, hell, I bet the damn horse didn't appreciate it.
Exactly.
But
yeah, I can sort of remember, when you and I first ever talked about it, and I'd figured out that this is one of the places I live down there in Mississippi. I had figured out that they were molesting some guys. You remember the location we call Armstrong Corner?
Yep.
Out north of there, they were molesting that guy's horses, and I think that might have been the first time I ever mentioned it to you. Was I was out there, and I was talking to that guy one day, and that owned that property there, and I was just asking him if anything odd had happened and everything. Well, I noticed his horse is acting sort of crazy, and one of them came up close to the fence there, and then I got to looking at it, and I saw the telltale signs right there in his mane, and I started, gently talking to the guy, and he, here we figured out, and what was going on with his horses, and.
Well, it's not an easy deal to do, Tim. I mean, you know this. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm sitting in this room with two of my best friends and a lady, and I feel uneasy talking about this, but it's something that needs to be brought up. And then when you talk to people that call you in to investigate what's going on, because you and me both have been called to several cases in different states where this is currently going on even at this minute.
Well, down in Florida right now,
Yeah. And we've got photos of this braiding and the whole 9 yards, and this is just a subject that's never broached. I remember the first time I talked about this subject with Matt. You remember that, Matt?
Yeah. Yeah. I thought you were plumb crazy.
And I couldn't really blame you. I mean, you're sitting here talking to a complete stranger. In your case, Coombo, when you talk to the guy northeast of Armstrong Corner,
mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you broach that type subject with somebody who 9 times out of 10 is not gonna pass you off as being crazy as hell anyway, because you researching something that don't
mm-hmm.
exist. And then you're going to say, well, them things out there sexually assaulting your horses.
Exactly.
I mean, man, call the paddy wagon.
And at that time, I had never, ever, ever mentioned that to anybody. Not you, not nobody. And, but I just saw, it took me, it took me years to figure out what was going on.
Wow.
But, the thing about it is, the fellow that ran our farm, he knew what was going on. Right. He spent 30 years out there, sitting out there in the dark, 3 or 4 nights a week for 30-something years probably, trying to, looking for something, sitting there with a spotlight in his hand and a damn rifle in the other. And he would sit there, and he'd every so often he was sitting back there in the pastures up on the ridge, and every so often he'd turn that light on, and he'd scan the tree line, scan around the pasture with that light. And he knew something was going on, but he would never tell any of us about it. And he went to his grave without telling anybody, but he damn sure wasn't out there all those nights, and he was scared half to death of whatever it was. Because he would not get out of the truck after dark anywhere near the woods. And he used to tell me, he's told me several times, he said there's things out here that only God Almighty himself knows what they are. And
right. You've always used that as your quote.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
What was you going to say, Matt?
Well, I was just going to say that getting back to the braided mane and tail aspect, people call them braids. It's like a twisted, knotted up strands of hair. It looks like a braid, but it's not like a meticulous, pretty braid.
No, it's not a perfect braid.
Right. And that is something that is really well known throughout, livestock owners. They call them witch knots. And everybody has a different theory about how they happen or what causes them. Ranging, witches, it has something to do with spell casting. Horse thieves will do it to mark which horses they're going to steal.
Right.
There was a television show that followed police officers around in the swamps of Louisiana. I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
But there was an episode where a lady had, put her horse up in the stable, and she ran inside for something. She was inside for a few minutes, and she comes back out, and her horse was all stressed out and sweating, and it had these braids in its mane. And she called the cops, and they were talking about, since it took place in Louisiana, they actually had a name for it. And it's believed that it's the spirits of deceased children that come and, are playing with the horse's mane or whatever. But it's known that this does happen. Now, your skeptics will say, oh, well, it's the wind, that does it, or something to that effect. But,
wind shear.
Right, but it takes, it'll take a month for that to happen. It doesn't just happen overnight. And it's just, people know this goes on, but they haven't figured out the whole puzzle yet. They haven't put the pieces together. And you guys have been able to put the pieces together.
Well, yeah, you was talking about that show. I'll never forget it. When that was on, it was funny because as soon as that episode was over with, the first thing I did was call you, Matt. We was laughing about it because we were both watching the same show at the same time. And I said, yeah, you know what happened there, don't you, Matt? And he said, yeah, what you and Kumbo said.
Yeah.
What have you found out there in where you're at, Brenda? Is it about basically the same thing?
Yeah, I had been called on one similar to that. I guess it'd be the same thing, really, from what you described. The lady had been having some problems with it coming around her horse corral, and she couldn't understand why it kept bothering her horses, and she started noticing some scratches on the buttock area. Not only there, but also, some scratches also on the around close to the neck area. Like as if maybe something's holding the neck. And she didn't realize that this is probably what it's doing to the horse. So that it was very skittish. The horse was really jumpy. Yep. And she couldn't figure out why is it being so jumpy towards her, and she had called me to come out there to go, take a look at the horse. So I did, and I had noticed that the scratches, like I said, on both sides of the back end of the horse, and then also the scratch around the neck area.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're trying to figure out what was going on, what ways, it's always coming and bothering the horses, she would tell me. She says, what does it want with my horse? Well, little did she know, and I know that it was doing that. She couldn't believe it, after I was telling her about it, what these things can do.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
she's like, oh my God, that's the last thing that I'd ever think it would do. Do that for a horse, and
absolutely.
And she just, was really actually blown away by that. Well, that's something that they do, and they'll do it. A lot of people out there like.
Yeah. Do you remember how you found out about all this, Brenda? Or did somebody share it with you, or you just found it out by accident like we did?
Pretty much by accident, and then also, at first when I had, seen the scratch marks where they were at, and then, in my mind, I'm like, no, I don't think so. But then when I started hearing, I believe when you had brought it up also, that's when I'm like, okay, then I'm like, that's what it's doing, that's got to be that, And because I had also, she wasn't the only one. I had gotten another call from another gentleman this time. Like, hey, my horse is acting really funny. And it's got scratches on the back end as well. And then he's like, well, what the heck's going on? And not only that, like I said, there were some scratches around the neck area as if something was holding the neck. Left marks on the neck as well. And he was puzzled. Like, well, what is it doing to my horse? What does it want? And like I said, and like the lady said, that's the last thing they'd ever thought it would do.
Yes,
but it does, and it is, and it is happening out there. And people, they don't want to believe it. They like, oh, you guys are crazy, and, just like you said earlier. But it is happening. We've had, like I said, I've had some calls on stuff like that. Horses being really skittish and jumping, and they don't know why. And when the owners would walk up to it, especially walking from behind it, boy, they jump. They're like scared, like, oh God, it's back. But they're just like so puzzled. And when you start telling them this is probably what it's doing, or this is what it is doing, and they're like, no way, it can't be happening. I'm like, well, look at the marks. Look at how the animal is being really jumpy, especially if you just walk walk by it. Really, it's just, go ahead.
What really got to me is after I realized what was going on. We had a stable / tack room area, had a corral around one side of it. Had a pretty good sized corral there, and then we had some some little troughs there where we'd put out sweet feed and stuff like that. Well, I was putting out range cubes, and grain and sweet feed and stuff for the horses and all, and I was they were coming up there to get something to eat. Well, I didn't realize it, but I was luring them right into a trap. And because this is later on I didn't know it after I got out of college and I'm living out there by myself. A lot of times
them up for them.
A lot of times I'd hear them at night. I'd be there in the house and I'd hear the horses start raising hell and screaming like you said. And they'd go hauling ass off, run off. I'd run out there. Well, what in the matters? What in the world's got into them things? What are they doing? And they'd go hauling butt all the way across the pasture, to the far side of the pasture, and be running up and down the fence, wide open, fast as they could go. And I'd be out there shining out.
No apparent reason, anyway.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was wild dogs, and I'd be out there looking for dogs or coyotes. Would never see any. And what really the scary thing is those bastards. I know that they were hiding right there around that tack room, and I just didn't see them. And
they was waiting on you to hem the horses up in the corral to feed them, and then you'd close them up for the night, and there they are.
Well, no, I didn't close them up I didn't close them up in there, Bear, because I had learned a long time ago you didn't do that. They'd get in there, they'd tear that thing all to pieces trying to get out.
Oh yeah,
and I just, but I couldn't understand, why they were going so crazy. Why they were running off, and I'd get out there with a spotlight, and I couldn't see anything. Well, like I said, it took me quite a while to ever figure out what in the hell was, what was going on. But but the part that infuriated me was the fact that that I was luring them into that, with feed and stuff, and well, plus they thought that's fairly close to the house. They thought they were safe, coming up there, but they weren't.
Yeah, you're talking about the horses. Yeah, being
exactly
safe. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And which incidentally, my very first sighting that I ever saw, my very first time I ever saw one as an adult, was right out there, right beside that stable, right beside it, and it was up there. We had just moved around a bunch of the sweet feed and stuff. I think it was coming up there getting the sweet feed, but and robbing that, but enjoying itself in other ways too. But
yeah.
Anyway, go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was just gonna say, you brought up wild dogs, and I'm sure there will be people that will listen to this and say, okay, well, yeah, something's, scaring the horses, getting them all worked up, but, other things can do that. And just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's Bigfoot. So I just want to add that this is not something we're going to get into as part of this discussion. I don't feel it appropriate. But I will say that on rare occasions, there is other, much more graphic physical evidence to support this theory.
Yep.
Yes.
And I will just leave it at that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Now, I will ask a question for the audience, because I'm sure this question would come up. Okay, guys, why would they do it?
You want to hit it, Tim, or you want me to?
Yeah, I'll hit it. Because they're subordinate males and they're not in the pecking order to breed. Big Daddy, the alpha does the breeding in the troop, and so the subordinate males have to find some other way to get satisfaction. Yeah, they're sexually frustrated, and they're
sitting there watching the big guy have all the fun. They smell all the smells associated with it, the whole 9 yards. And I'll say one more thing, then I'll drop it back to you. A lot of times when we noticed these braids occurring on these mares was when they would come into heat or into season. Go ahead. Well,
the alpha, if he is successful, he has control of all the breeding females, and he ain't gonna let anybody else horn in on his territory.
That's why he's the alpha.
So the subordinate males in the hanger zone, they got to do something else, you know. So that's the reason. And anything else, Matt? Yeah.
I went on an investigation in Carroll County in the late 80s. Word had got out around in the state of Mississippi that I was the one you kind of talk to about these weird things, especially if it dealt with a booger or a Bigfoot or whatever. And it always amazed me. The Mississippi Game and Fish Commission would always deny these things existed, but they always knew who was asking the questions. So if anything like this would ever come up, especially in the north central part of the state, they would always refer these people to me for some ungodly reason. Now, the only way that they do this was the Mississippi Game and Fish Commission was getting these people to get into contact with me because I volunteered my phone number to them. And yet they would deny they exist, but they'd always refer them to me. This guy in Carroll County, Mississippi, there's a lot of hills and a lot of steep hills with ravines, and people would build houses on top of these hills or on the slopes of them and so forth and so on. Well, anyway, they get to managing their yard. They had cut their yard down, but they couldn't always get to those steep sections. And this one guy, he got smart. He went and bought him a goat, a G-O-A-T, a goat. And he put this goat on a big old chain, a log chain, because if he put him on a rope, the goat would eat the rope and get away. But what he did, he put this big old chain around a tree, and it was something like 50 feet long. It's pretty good little swath there. But he had always would put that goat on that tree and let this female goat eat all the weeds and the vegetation and all on the slope of that hill. He kept it all looking pretty good. And once the goat would clean out that whole circle around that tree within a 50 feet radius, he'd always moved the goat over to another tree. Something got a hold of the goat one night and killed it. They went and investigated it because they was called in about it, because whatever did this had ripped the head off the goat the whole 9 yards, didn't eat the goat or nothing else, just left the carcass there on the ground. The guy calls me up. I go and check it out. Get there to where the body is, and something had sexually molested that female goat before they killed it. And it was very obvious because that goat was ripped in places she didn't need to be ripped at. And it was very evident what it was. The Game and Fish Commission told the man that they thought it was some human male pervert that had sexually assaulted the goat. But he had to have had enormous strength because he did not cut the goat's head off. It was ripped clean off of its body. and this was probably after the sexual assault had happened. It's not just horses, it's not just cows, it's not just goats. If this thing will do this to domestic animals and farm animals and things like this, how come it's not capable of doing this to humans and to everything else?
Well, there's stories of it.
Yeah, I know that too, and I was going to get into that too, but I was going to see what you had to add possibly to that. Because I know you've been on some calls too. We've been on a call in Oklahoma. Our good friend and fellow outlaw Dan Rickey, when we first met him and we broached this subject with him, he told of the mare horse out in central Oklahoma, between Oklahoma City and the Red River, out in the Arbuckle Mountains, where this person who owned horses was having their mare sexually assaulted with handprints on the very sweaty, wet skin. The horse be skittish, scared, shook up, mane would be braided, tail would be braided, the whole 9 yards. I mean, and like Kumbo mentioned earlier, we're talking to a lady in Florida right now while this is actually going on at this very minute, and we're trying to help her out with her situation. But this happens more than people want to think it does. And if you'll notice the words I said, want to think it does. But it does happen. These things are dangerous. And now, think about this. I don't even want to talk about this, but what else is capable? I mean, just take your average dog, for instance. I mean, if a dog is ready to do it, he'll jump on anything. I'm talking about a chicken, a cat, anything. A human is the only entity that can make up its own mind. Look, you're not supposed to do that with other animals. And then everybody wants to call Bigfoot a human. Well, if it's a human, it ought to make up its own mind that it shouldn't be trying to interbreed with other species. But this thing right here has no compunction about it, stopping from doing anything when he's sexually frustrated.
Well, now, Bear, you're from the South.
Yeah, I know the South is going to be
There's lots of stories that circulate. Well,
there's some people that are screwed in the head, too.
Yeah, there's humans that have the ability to know better, but they lack the sense not to try it.
Well, there's laws against that stuff.
Right.
And they're on the books. I'm telling you guys, this is a subject that it makes me nervous to discuss. I'm not embarrassed to discuss it other than around ladies. And, you know, I'm honored that Brenda come on here and is doing the show with us because she can back up what we're saying, because this happens out there where she's at too, and she knows it happens, and we know it happens. But I would guesstimate that out of the percentage that knows that Bigfoot exists, there's only a small percentage that knows this is an attribute that Bigfoot is capable of.
It is a touchy subject, you know, like he said, you know, a lot of people don't want to believe it and don't want to hear it, but, you know, it is happening out there, you know, in different states, you know, and
of course yeah, definitely. It's I think it's widespread wherever you've got boogers, you know, and there's livestock around, you're subject to have this happening. And I don't care where it is, anywhere from, you know, the Pacific Northwest to you know, like I said, I know it goes on in Arizona, New Mexico. I know it goes on in Washington. I know it goes on in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi. I've heard of it in quite a few places over the years.
Well, Brenda said something just then. She said a lot of people don't want to believe it, and even after they hear this show, they're going to get mad at us because these guys are crazy. I mean, they're going to deny what we're saying from the top of the mountain because, no, Bigfoot is not capable of doing that. He's too gentle. He's too sweet. I mean, he's not capable of doing this. It happens, people.
That's just like people don't want to believe that they'll eat your dog, but they will.
Yep. I just spoke with a lady earlier in the week, and she said that her mom had about, I believe, 7 dogs, I believe, and she's down to 1. All the other dogs are gone. I mean, I'm getting reports of, their dogs and cats are coming up missing. Sheep are coming up missing just about every day.
Yep.
And they're like now I was telling her, I said, harvest time's over with. So now they're hungry and they're going after animals now.
This is the lean time of the year. This is the lean time of year. Like you said, there's nothing left from the harvest. There's nothing left out in the old gardens. There's the fruits and the nuts are gone to California, and the ones that haven't been eaten, and so they're living off mostly protein right now, and your dog and your cat is a really good source of protein
at the moment.
But since we're talking about the darker side to Bigfoot, people also need to know that they don't always kill animals for food.
Nope.
No.
They'll kill a dog. Killing a dog is not a big deal to them.
Right.
If you got a stupid dog, and by stupid dog I mean one that doesn't know to shut up and get the hell out of the way,
exactly,
there's a good chance it will disappear or you'll find it torn to pieces.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. I investigated an incident that happened a few years ago, not far from here in Missouri, not far from where I live, and where people had several German Shepherds and a Belgian Malinois that were very vocal and barked and barked and barked all the time. Well, back behind their home was a grove of wild cherry trees, and the boogers like those wild cherries. Plus, they like the jelly that grows on the trunks of the cherry trees, and plus there were wild plums and stuff like that back there. Well, every time the boogers, this is what I have surmised, because I found evidence that they had been feeding back there in that grove of trees and bushes. That when the boogers would come up there, the dogs were raising holy hell at them. So they just went up there one day and grabbed the Belgian Malinois and snatched his head through a cattle panel made out of 1/4-inch steel rod, and ripped the hide off of his back and down over his head. They called another German Shepherd and shoved it down into the ground and left a unbelievably large depression in the ground, ripped its skin off of his back and down over its head, and that dog actually survived. And then another dog that was there, they ripped it up a similar way, but then they twisted his head around backwards. And they came up there and it killed 2 of the dogs and seriously and permanently maimed a third one. And I believe it was mostly because the dogs were loud, yappy dogs. I had a neighbor in Mississippi that could not keep a dog. He would not. He had Labrador Retrievers, and they barked and barked and barked and barked. I'm right there, across the road within sight of him, And, you know, I was able to keep a dog, but my German Shepherds were smart enough to shut the hell up and get under the house. Yep. And they survived, and his dogs didn't. What's interesting is, you know, he had this one particular dog that had its right top tooth broken off in an odd fashion. And that dog disappeared, and about a year or so later, its skull showed up again on my front porch. And
there was that canine.
Yep. And I lived in another place where I heard my dog Bo used to run around with two other dogs in the neighborhood. And one of them's name was Rowdy. I think the other one's name was, of all things, Bowser. And it was a half German. It was a half Basset Hound, half Beagle. The other dog was a little Pomeranian. The three of them looked pretty weird, you know, a German Shepherd, a Pomeranian, and this half Beagle, half Basset Hound running together. But they were buddies. And I was sitting out on my deck one morning drinking coffee, and the three of them were out there, and they crossed the creek there north of the house, went back in the woods, and there were boogers over in those woods, and I could hear old Bowser over there, brrr, brrr, you know, baying and stuff as they went. And all of a sudden, here comes Bo and Rowdy running wide open back to the house, across the creek, with their tails tucked up under their legs. They ran up on the deck where I was and got up next to me, and they're looking out through the deck rail over there, and they're just hunkered down and shaking. And I can hear old Bowser over there. Well, I called him 2 or 3 times. He didn't pay attention to me, and he kept on baying. Now, you know, I heard him over here go, brrr, brrr. As the end of Bowser, nobody ever saw him or heard of him again. And a lady lived behind me. She said that she saw the boogers get her big boxer dog. She actually saw it with her own eyes.
Wasn't that the one where the dog was chained to the dog house and you?
No, that was a different place.
Yeah, I want you to tell that story.
Oh, that doghouse story, that's a bad one. All right. People that I worked with, family that I worked with, he had a real good hound, real good hunting dog, and he kept it dog houses back in the backyard behind the house. And the dog was chained to the dog house. And the dog would get out there and bark and bark and bark at times, and bark towards the woods. Well, one night they were there, and the dog was barking and barking, and it's just going crazy barking. And the guy was at work. The woman and the kids were scared to get out and go see what was going on. Next morning, the guy comes home from work. She tells him that the dog. Oh, and everything gets quiet. And the wife tells the husband, you know, that something happened to the dog last night. And they go back there, and the doghouse is gone. And they find, and now this doghouse probably weighed 300 pounds. It was built out of 3/4-inch plywood and 2x4s. Came out of shipping crates for heavy equipment. And anyway, he got to following the trail where the doghouse had been drugged. That doghouse was drugged well over 100 yards back into the woods, and they found the doghouse back there wedged in between a couple of trees, and the chain was still attached, and the collar was on the end of the chain, but it had been broken. Dog was gone. And they never did find it hiding or hair of that dog. But that thing had drugged that doghouse for well over 100 yards, and he's telling me about it. I went back there, and I got to see it. He took me back there and showed it to me, and we were going to try to drag the doghouse back, and we couldn't pull it. We could pull it a short distance, but he ended up getting a dadgum tractor back there and hooking a rope onto it to pull it out of, you know, where it was way back in there. But, you know, it was, I've investigated a lot of dog killings and, you know, dog disappearances over the years. I know you have too, Bear.
Yep. And I bet Brenda has too. What have you run into, ma'am?
I've run into basically the same thing, you know, dogs, like our neighbor. I've heard that these things also, they don't like pet bulls. What they'll do, you know, because pet bulls, once they climb onto your leg, I mean, it's hard to break them away from that. And these things know what those pet bulls can do. They'll take them and grab them by the mouth and rip them right in half, right there.
Yep.
You know, and our my husband's aunt that was, you know, just across the field from us, she had 3 of them. And one morning she went up to go feed her dogs. Well, one of them was wrapped around the tree, you know, with his neck broken, you know, like entwined with the I believe the chain.
Right.
And she came and killed it. And the next day she went to go feed her dog, and the second one was killed. The same. Well, this one, the second dog, how the dog was killed was. It was thrown on a tree branch on the top by one of the tree branches, like, you know, like, okay, just imagine you got a tree branch, and he threw the dog. He still had a chain on him around his neck, and it, like, I guess you could say, maybe went around that branch several times, and it left that dog hanging in the tree with his neck broken.
All right.
And the next dog was thrown, I believe, the same way, too. She had lost all 3 of her dogs.
Yeah.
One right after another.
Yeah. Our friend down in Georgia, you know, Georgia Tracker, Bear told me a story here back during the summer about some folks that lived back through the woods behind them that had several pit bulls, and you know, there was a logging operation that went on over there across the road from his house, and the boogers moved out down there, and they moved to the west, you know, back into the woods back behind his house. Well, you know, back through the woods there was a big subdivision, and, you know, a lot of big houses and everything, and one particular family had several pit bulls, and they barked a lot and stuff, and you know, something came up there one night and tore all those pit bulls to pieces, pulled them apart.
Yep. That's exactly what they'll do, you know.
Yeah.
And people wonder why they do that, and what it is if these things want to come around your house and there's a threat to something giving their presence away, like a yapping, barking dog or a pit bull or a big dog, one that's going to defend its territory, those are the dogs that end up don't being around too long. They're gone immediately, and once they're gone, see, they have free reign to come up in your yard and do whatever they want to do when they want to do it. That's a threat to them, and that's why they get rid of that threat.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they will. You know, interesting thing we were talking about earlier that this time of the year, in the late winter and early spring, you know, they're starved for protein and stuff. The incident that I reported that took place in Missouri, where the 3 dogs 2 were killed and 1 were maimed, that was in the summertime. You know, so there was plenty of other things to eat, and, you know, the main reason they killed those dogs was just because they got tired of being barked at. You know, they were, and like Bear said, they were giving them away. They were wanting to come up there and enjoy the available food source, but couldn't couldn't do it for being disturbed. So,
well, you know, just take, for instance, you know, you got a bunch of dogs in your yard. Why do you have dogs to begin with, other than the fact that you love dogs, but especially one that you keep in the yard? Because 9 times out of 10, when you live out isolated in the country, you want a dog to announce the presence of anything that don't belong around there. Then they get to barking and see the boogers off there in the bushes over there watching the reactions, and the dogs start raising 10 times worth of cane out there in the yard, and eventually they're going to see that light in the bedroom turn on, and then they're going to see the light in the living room turn on, and then somebody's going to stick their head out the door, probably with a flashlight in their hand, and wave the flashlight around a little bit and all that, and see, they're watching the dog's reaction and what's caused by the dog's barking, and they see the human factor being added into the equation. They're smart enough that they figure it out that, look, when those dogs start raising sand, the human's going to be alerted, going to wake up, going to come out, see what's going on. I can't go up there and steal the dog's food or the cat food or the sweet feed in the barn or whatever, as long as this mouthy old dog over here is raising 10 times worth of cane. I got to get rid of that dog.
We're all doing the same thing. We're all assuming the same thing. We're all showing the pictures, everything. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good because that's good evidence. But my whole issue is, what about the safety of the people? That's right. My concern. I worry about the people, some things that have happened in the past that I'll bring up. I think those things are the things that need to be brought up. What do we do? You know, yes, a lot of people don't understand, and like you had brought up, they think a lot of these things are friendly, but no, they're not. They'll turn on you if you're not ready. You know, yep. All of us need to be out there in the research field, need to be very careful of these things. I don't care how experienced or how famous you are, this thing will knock you down to the ground.
Yes, it will. Do more than that, do you?
It'll turn you inside out, literally.
It will. You know, if you're not ready, it will. You know, that's scary. You know, some people die from that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you know, that's my whole deal. That's the reason why I got into this BigFoot thing, is to get the awareness out there. Be careful of your surroundings out there. Look out for these little things. Do some of these little things that may help keep these things away. You know, that's what I wanted to bring up tonight. Is a lot of that.
And don't do some of the big things that are just inviting trouble.
Exactly.
And I heard something going. The problem with us when we get to starting about something, we never actually finish it because we branch off into so many damn different directions that every one of them has very important meaning towards what we're discussing in the first place. What we call a Bigfoot and a Sasquatch, we call them boogers in the South. I said, what in the hell is that? Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of Bigfoot Outlaw Radio. We've got our regulars on here. Of course, there's Matt Knapp and Tim Kumbo Baker, my good friend and fellow research partner. Tonight, we're honored with the presence of, I think, I call her the queen of the Bigfoot world, Miss Brenda Harris, out from New Mexico, Arizona, up there in the Four Corners. How you doing, Brenda?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Doing great. Oh, we enjoy having you every time you've got time to come on the show and help us out. Tonight we're going to approach a subject that a lot of people don't want to discuss. We're going to talk about the taboo of the Bigfoot world. I'm sure a lot of people may be scratching their head and saying, what in the heck is he talking about? But to start it all out and to give prime examples, common sense comes into play a lot of ways. And with Bigfoot, you do not give it the benefit of a doubt in regard to it being a gentle giant. You have to use a lot of common sense, a lot of caution, and be prepared, because you may wake up a sleeping giant that you don't want to contend with later. I'm going to start this whole segment off with something. We've discussed this show. How long, Matt? For the last 2 or 3 months. It's something we wanted to approach when we originally did this show back in 7, 8 years ago, but we never would do it. But I'm thinking it's way beyond time that we need to approach this.
Right. There are things that, like you said, don't really get discussed in terms of, Bigfoot research and what people know and what people don't know. Lots of people want to paint a picture and make this thing something that they want it to be and not what it actually is. And the fact of the matter is, these things can and will be very dangerous.
They have a dark side.
They definitely have a dark side.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're speaking of dark sides, we're not talking about the mystic arts either. There's nothing magical. No, we're not talking that way at all.
No, we're just talking about the brutality of nature.
And that's what it is, basically, is the brutality of nature. What do you think about it in terms of trying to explain this to people, what we're going to discuss, Brenda, or do you have anything you'd like to reflect on before we dive into it with both feet?
Well, I would like to bring out more, some of the stuff that you're saying, but also some of the do's and don'ts. Right. I think a lot of that needs to be brought back up. Things that they could look out for. And if people out there are having some problems with these things coming around on their property and they don't want them there, if I could share some of the things that may help the people, that's the one reason why I got into this. You hear so many of people collecting like the evidence and footprints and casts and the vocalizations and, hair samples and all that. That's great. That's more evidence that can be proven that these things do exist. They're out there. But, and every research group that I have come across and have listened to, it seems like a lot of them are about themselves. Right. Kind of that brag about themselves, that are the so-called number one Bigfoot researchers out there. In my own opinion, I know this will probably make a lot of groups out there upset. There's no number one research group out there.
We're just going to discuss things that a lot of people don't want to even think that a Bigfoot is capable of doing. They don't even want to discuss it. That's why we try to emphasize a lot of times, yes, this is an animal. It's an extraordinary animal, but it's a wild animal. It's one out there that walks on 2 legs at times, just like a human. But just because it walks like a human and maybe even communicate in its own fashion like a human, don't make it a human. That's going to be probably a subject of contention later on, but maybe after we do this show that hopefully we can enlighten some people on what we're specifically talking about. But we're not going to sit here and tell you that a booger is something like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons. the movie that was put out years ago. It's definitely not that way, even though a lot of people want it to be the gentle giant. And it may be and have its moments, and it will be a gentle giant. But if you'll watch a grizzly bear in the wild, or a mountain lion, or a coyote, or a wolf, at times they have gentle moments too. But I guarantee you, you're not going to walk up to a grizzly bear and pet him while he's over there harvesting on an elk. You're not going to do the same thing with a pack of wolves over a carcass of a white-tailed deer. You